We're standing here with a 30-year-old persimmon. It'll be planted 30 years ago in January. This is now late December, so it's for all practical purposes having its 30th birthday from transplant. And it's definitely older. I can see places where the bark is coming loose here. This whole branch here is doing poorly. And it is an open question how much older this will get before it just totally craters. On the other hand, we got maybe 50, 60, 70 persimmon off of this last year. And virtually everything I have said, A through whatever, are apply in all of these plants pretty much, or could apply. So I wanted to illustrate this with terminal buds. S is strong scaffold, and this scaffold is not really great. I've tried to get branches going this way, but the fig over here is taking its energy. The fig is much more aggressive than the persimmon, and branches basically die that go out here any length of time. So basically, in a small space orcharding, you're constantly cutting back a fig for a persimmon, or trying to engineer things so they don't interfere with each other. And persimmons have a consistent problem of trying to create very sharp crotch angles. You have to watch them like a hawk. You can create a flat crotch, strong crotch angle, but if you're at least bit lazy during the summer or got something else to do, they'll go and create these things, and by the time you figured out they're there, there's no simple way to get rid of something like that. So there are things you can do, which is don't let this thing get too big so that it doesn't create a lot of force on the rest of the tree. So I was going to talk about terminal buds, and terminal buds are what we're talking about here is that growth hormones tend to go to the uppermost branches. So these things, there's growth hormones up there at the top, and that's where it tries to produce its fruit. It's probably a good place if you want birds to peck it and get the seeds and plant them somewhere else if you're a tree. But from my point of view, I just assumed they were down lower. And so a 60-degree angle branch would move upwards and put growth hormones at the tip of this, the terminal bud, and about 16 inches below it we would get fruiting wood. And this is wood that grew last summer. You can see the rusty brown color in here, and it's pretty easy once you've spent some time telling what wood grew. The big buds on this thing, which tend to be in the middle part of the branch, not down low and not up here, these will put out spurs with fruit on them come the next year. And that is what you want to grow every spring on these things. And when you're pruning, this thing here is probably close to dead, and you could cut this thing off with your disinfected pruning shears and so on. And something like this doesn't have any big buds on it. It did grow last year, but I don't see it likely doing anything, and probably get rid of this thing here. And years ago, what happened here also happened on here. Cut this thing back and had massive growth of new wood here, which produced lots of fruit. And now this is getting old, and so on. Now this one produced a lot of fruit up here, and it's of course interacting with this bunch grape, and each are causing the other problems, so we're going to have to do something about that. Here is some new wood, and that's because it's up at the highest points of the branch. You can see all of this new wood, and some of this actually will probably produce. These buds are pretty small, but this one here's probably produced some fruit, and so on. This one, you can see here, that's second year wood. You can see it had a persimmon on it. This will not produce any wood, any fruit next year. This could be cut off and hopefully produce new shoots. Here is another one that was full of fruit, but you see it didn't grow any new wood out here. So this whole branch here is going to produce nothing at all next spring. Absolutely nothing. This one here isn't going to produce anything. This one here isn't going to produce anything. This one is new wood, but it doesn't have any big buds on it, so it's basically not very useful. And when you look at this, you see that it's got very little promise for new fruit this coming year. So the question is this the year to cut the thing back here to where there's brand new, lovely new growth? And my belief is yes, this is old wood that we need to get rid of, and we need to generate new wood and a new branch. That's my conclusion, and that's what's going to happen. So how do you take a big branch off of something this old? Basically, I come in here with my saw, and I cut at the bottom here, well away from where I plan to cut. So I'm planning to eventually cut right here. I will cut on the underneath side right here. Then I will come in and I will cut through here up from this. And what it will do is when it gets very weak here, I'll try to hold it, but it's pretty heavy. When it gets very weak, it's going to try to rip this way. And when it hits that cut, it'll just fall off, is what will happen. It won't go any further, and then it'll be weak here, and I can come in and cut it probably right about here, and it'll be easy to cut. There won't be much weight on it, and I can easily hold this with my hand so as to not tear anything on this. Now this is still not a very good branch, and I don't know how old it will stay. I have no idea how many more years I will get out of this persimmon. It's already produced me, maybe it started fruiting in 5 years in, 6 years in, and we've had a lovely amount of fruit off of it. But what that means is that you plant younger persimmons, and I have one that's bearing that's maybe 7, 8, 9 years old in the front yard, and I have another one that's about 2 years old in the side yard there. And so we're dealing with this issue. So that's terminal buds. Terminal buds, see this thing here is not this thing's going downwards. That one up there had fruit on it. So question is, what do I have? Maybe I cut back all the way to here. This looks like terminal bud. So maybe that's what I want there. So basically every one of these things, you could do this with the fig. There's your terminal buds. And these will be terminal if I cut the tall thing out. Now, let's see what we could do here. So upward at good angles. Persimmons don't grow upward at good angles. They grow terrible angles. And you know, you'd want these things to go 60 degrees, but they want to sit out at 45 or lower. They flatten, then they go up at vertical. So upward at good angles. This is pretty good angle. The crotch is not too bad. It's not great, but it's going up at a good angle, and you can see it's pretty productive. The terminal buds are going up there. And question of vertical branches. Vertical branches, probably this isn't the best place to look at vertical branches, but because persimmons do cast a lot of shade, but something like a pear or an apple, and we've got an apple over here, it might be better to explain it there, and the same with weed management. So let's go over here to the apple. So this is a Carnival apple, a lovely, delicious apple developed by Tree Search Farms in conjunction with others. And I see one of my weights. This is another piece of old hardware, and you can use it to, this is a clothespin, and you can use it to flatten out something if you want to do it. See, so you got old pieces of hardware around that you bought and then realized you couldn't use them for anything. There are a lot of possibilities here. And weed management, this is a piece of grapevine, which is still over here, and this other stuff. So, okay, so we wanted to talk about, so you can see I've developed a pretty good scaffold here. This one here is not very good, and we probably need to get rid of that one or something. I don't like that crotch and hadn't realized it was so steep there. When the leaves come off of these trees, it's much easier to see where the problems are than it is in the middle of summer when it's hot. See, this kind of thing is developing a new scaffold off the main trunk, and we can't have that unless we wanted to get rid of this whole branch, so this will have to go. But basically, you see how vertical pears and apples tend to do, and so they either you need to flatten this thing out, or you need to thin it out so that we don't get a whole lot of shade, especially near the trunk. Look at how much grew during the summer here, this vertical material, and all of this will just create shade, and up here all this stuff is going to produce leaves, and there will be no apples down in this area if we let them do that. So all of this stuff that's close to the trunk needs to be removed. Now when you get out here, vertical doesn't cause the problems, because if it's shady down here, who cares? So so here the only real question is there too much of this stuff? And if there is, what are you taking out and what are you leaving? And the broad answer is that if you can flatten something out, you can get some good results from this. Now this is not flattening enough. This is going to have to be pulled down with something much heavier, perhaps a gallon jug filled with water, from a milk bottle say, and a wire from the ground would do it to flatten this out. And that, if we get it at the right angle here, we'll get a whole bunch of apples off of that thing. But the broad answer is that that essentially this thing needs to move out as best as possible at 60 degrees. And so if it's too vertical, you either have to cut it off, shorten it, or pull it down, unless it is a scaffold. So at most we want is 2 scaffold branches here. This is at the right angle. Here we've got something crossing and rubbing each other. But this is at the right angle, but this is much smaller. This is very vigorous here. This is very vigorous. So anyway, all we want here is maybe 2, and they need to be going at the right direction. And we're, of course, running into a persimmon here, so that's another issue. But So here is something that is a new scaffold branch being created, and if we pull this down or put a spreader in here and can force this down a bit, then if I get rid of this thing here, I've got a pretty nice looking branch. So that's the terminal, and terminal buds, vertical, upward at good angles. Weed management is super important with apples. Apples that are grafted easily rot out. They have something called crown lull. And you don't want to let anything grow, even in the summertime, around this base here, or you're going to have a big rot spot in here that will eventually kill it. So basically, weed management is important. This got, that looks, I don't know what that is, but I had plants bedding in here from this side. I had plants coming in from that side. And this one's probably Rangoon creeper. So if you do this in tight spacing, you're going to have to do a little bit more pruning than if you had a multi-acre plot. But on the other hand, taking care of something in a small space is a lot. You don't have as much travel time, and irrigation of plants that are scattered over an acre or two, or protecting them from, say, deer, is a much harder problem. So the issue of branches crossing over, that's X, and crossing over branches, like we already sort of talked about it, but when you have this stuff, all this stuff up here, imagine this all full of leaves in the summertime, basically it's going to shade. You're not going to get apples down here, even though these are little spurs that might produce them, if you let too much stuff up here grow. So basically you're always looking at that, and I always look at this in summertime too to see what's getting shaded and what isn't. So you develop a pretty good idea. But basically keep in mind that sun is what creates, allows trees, leaves to photosynthesize, to get carbon, to make sugars, to grow fruit and apples, or whatever the fruit is. And if you don't let sun get on the leaves down low, you're not going to have fruit. And the only place you're going to have it is on the outside of the tree and way up at the top. And if you let the tree get too high, now that Fayot over there has gotten quite high, but it drops its fruit when it's ripe. So that part of it's not really a problem. But anyhow, crossing overhead nearby branches X, the yield for the year, this has started yielding more and more delicious apples every year. That's wide, and it needs a cross-pollination to do better. This is somewhat self-pollinating, but I've ordered an Anna apple for planting this winter. I intended to do it last winter, but I had an accident, didn't get to planting trees, and but the yield is, I think, going to be quite high on this particular one. Z is for zoology, which basically refers to pests. And the main pest that's a animal is birds on apples. They peck on them. And so basically I have some screening patches that I put on individual apples, and if I ever get to the point where I have too many apples to put individual protections around, I'll probably go to a bird net of some sort. But they're well worth protecting, so I will do that. But I don't think I have any real pest issues at all with this particular tree. It's healthy and doing well. So I could say more about many of these things. This started going up at a very steep angle, and I corrected it by serious pruning and forced that branch outwards. So it doesn't have a really great angle down there, but I do have some success. I think that's about it, A through Z. Good luck, and probably could say another couple of things. There's basically three types of pruning that goes on. This is maintenance pruning, what you think about with any reasonably mature fruit every year. Not all of these A through Z apply to every single one of them, but many of them do. Training has to do with what do you do with the new plant, like what do you do with the new persimmon as opposed to this old persimmon. What do you do with a new apple versus an old apple? And then there's renovation, and what I was talking about with the persimmon is basically renovation of this old persimmon. So we probably want to stop and go to the next, the front yard, and look at a few trees there as examples of some of this as well. Look at a younger persimmon and a brand new persimmon, just to give examples of the differences.